why do you think it is that, what is your sense of why there's that low uptake, and particularly why do you think we aren't, as an industry, cutting through with consumers? What's causing that disconnect?
So I think when I run workshops with advisors, sales as a force for good workshops, I always start off by asking that exact question, like, why do we have this protection gap? And there's a number of reasons that people come up with, but basically what it boils down to is that people just don't see the value in protection. And I think it fundamentally is an education issue. So very much what you said, Steph, that 1% of clients are actually going to ask for protection. So there isn't that education, there isn't that awareness. And the reason, I think, is because not enough people have had the opportunity to sit with an advisor and have a proper, meaningful conversation around protection. And so when you think about the responsibility that protection advisors have, that when a client sits with them, it's not about ticking a box, but it's about having this conversation which really will allow the client to sit and reflect on their priorities and their worries and their needs, because you might be the only person that ever has a conversation with the client about that before they're needing to claim or they are uninsurable. And so for me, really, it is exactly that, is what can we do to help clients see the value? And that only comes through a proper conversation at point of sale.
Yeah, because one of the things that you unpack through the Sales as a Force for Good training and a lot of the work you do with advisors, which I think is really interesting, is around these cognitive behavioural biases. And at Vitality, we talk about that a lot because it actually informs quite a lot of what we do with the programme, and these something kind of understanding psychology and how people make decisions, often irrationally, it has to be said. So I think we're all probably guilty of that. We don't always act in our own best interests. How do those kind of cognitive biases, so if we start to think about now how we kind of have these conversations, so how are they kind of playing out in a mortgage conversation that an advisor's having?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think I just want to maybe just start off by touching on some research that Vitality has done recently. And it was all about what home buyers are prioritizing when they first move into their home. And unsurprisingly, it's things like decorating and new furniture and renovating a kitchen or a bathroom, something that they can actually enjoy straight away. Yeah. And protection is unsurprisingly at the bottom of the list, because really protection is not something that they see immediately. And if we have a look at the research even further, however, 62% of people who were questioned said that when they were asked the question, what do you worry about most when it comes to your income stopping, their answer was the fear of losing their home. So it's not that people don't care about protection, it's really about the prioritization. And they are struggling with real world priorities, as well as things like present bias. And this present bias is this idea that I want to prioritize things that I feel are important right now. Right now, I want to decorate because I can't live with these pink walls, right? So that is something. Yeah. And then protection is not something that I need to prioritize right now. I don't think it's important right now. And so I'll take that. I think it's important, but I'll put it in the bucket of we can do that later. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And then, of course, optimism bias, this idea that we don't think it's going to happen to us. And if we look at the research, people are worried about it, but they don't necessarily think it's going to happen to them in the near future. Yeah. And they think it'll happen to somebody else, but not them. And so therefore they nicely take that problem or that priority and they deprioritize it and put in there, we'll come back to that a little bit later on. And if you think about it, when you combine all of those challenges, you can understand why clients don't immediately see the value of protection, and also understand how tricky and challenging an advisor's job really is.
Yeah, Jitin, this must be something that you see playing out in people. Julie mentioned optimism bias, but people naturally think, well, it'll probably happen to somebody else, not me. And I guess that is something that you've experienced.
Oh yeah, all the time. And I think there's the notion I'm too young, it won't happen to me just yet, because it's only when you get older things start happening. But picking on what Julie said, I think that timing as an advisor is absolutely right. And let's face it, for whoever has moved, whether it's you bought a home or you moved into a new rented property, it's exciting, it's fun. You know, that first trip to IKEA is dangerous because you go in thinking I'll get a bit of cutlery and you come out with a whole trolley full of stuff. Yeah, but it's fun, it's exciting. You know, you can have your friends over, you can have your family over. As you said, you're picking paint samples and all that. And somewhere that voice is telling you protection's important, but I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah. I found from an advisory perspective, now it's when do you position it, how do you position it? And you've got to highlight as to how integral it is as part of a financial planning concept. So we may talk about this a bit later because it always comes up, but most people, hey, I've done your mortgage, by the way, I need to talk to you about mortgage protection. Now, I'm not really a fan of mortgage protection because I do believe people have so much more in their lives than just the mortgage. And then that also automatically alienates anyone who's renting or is living with family looking to buy in the future. So we talk more lifestyle. But from the first conversation I have with any mortgage client, we have the phone call and it'll be, right, I'm going to help you sort out the mortgage, but also make sure we protect your lifestyle. And you've just started to plant the seed. Then when we meet face to face, we'll tend to bring up the protection conversation. More touch it, just explain what it is, and that we'll come back to it as a separate entity. At the end of that first meeting, again, I'm going to come back to you about protection. Now, the reason I don't go into too much detail with the mortgage meeting, for a lot of first-time buyers, it's a new concept buying a home. Yeah. Sorry, it is a new concept if you're a first-time buyer. Yeah. Actually, we found even those moving, they're still quite inundated about what it is. There's solicitors, agents, buyers, sellers, and your mom's telling you to do this when they bought the house 40 years ago. That's how the world was. And they just need to break it into small chunks. So I realized that when we were talking mortgages and protection, it was so much for them to absorb that they probably just got confused and buried their head in the sand. But by signposting that we will have a separate protection conversation, and that changed our mindset because we were no longer just trying to throw protection in at the end of the mortgage sale. Yeah. It was very much, this is a separate integral part of your financial plan. We'll have a separate conversation, and it really changed the mindset of not just us as advisors, but for how the clients absorb that as well. Yeah. And I think that's the sort of thing we need to be doing, is really highlight how important that protection side of the conversation is.
It's interesting, as you say, that you make it an integral part of the mortgage process, but obviously, as you say, it's a stressful, it's an overwhelming experience, yeah. Particularly for first-time buyers, but for anybody moving house, there's lots of things going on. So from your perspective, Steph, what's your kind of sense on what's like the right moment to introduce?
And I think, I think Justin's completely right. I don't think there is a right moment. I think actually it's down to advisors, are really, that's what they do all day, every day. They know the right moment. I think they've got to find a process that works for them as well. But I do agree with this signposting, positioning it up front to say, exactly what you just sort of said there. If I'm repeating you, I'm going to help you buy the home, but I'm also going to protect your home, and I'm going to protect your family going forward and protect your income. And if it's not the right moment at that point in time, then revisit it after they've completed. I also do think there's a piece around fact finding, and actually how do you weave protection questions into your fact find so it doesn't feel like it's, now we've done the mortgage fact find, now we're going to move to a protection fact find. That's, there is a piece around it that becoming integral and weaved together. I think that final piece just around referrals, if you aren't an advisor who wishes to advise on protection, that's also okay. Yeah. But you definitely have to have a conversation around protection, raise awareness, and then refer. And actually the research that we did showed that 55% of customers are more than happy to be referred. They totally understand, okay, it's the GP analogy, that's absolutely fine. I don't do this, but I'm going to make sure that, you still have that protection conversation. I'm going to refer you to a specialist who does that for you.